Industry, Science, and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23rd, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you're aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I'd like to actually give the members an update on the schedule because we've had some changes. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to provide the members with an update. So for the INDU members, as you know, we passed the motion last week, so last Tuesday. Just so you know, all 4 witnesses have accepted the invitation to appear. The problem has been scheduling. So the clerk and I have been working on this since the minute the motion has passed. Right now, this is where we stand. Again, I'm assuming that INDU is going to be sitting on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 1 in the new year. So things may change. I want you to bear that in mind. Right now, with respect to the vaccine manufacturing study, we have the PHAC president holding Tuesday, January 19th. This is an added meeting date if we can get authorization for hybrid sitting. We have Minister Haidu holding Tuesday, January 19th as well, added meeting date, again, if we have the authorization for hybrid sitting. Minister Baines, unfortunately, was not available this Thursday, and we couldn't move our INDU time slot. We were even trying to see if we could switch with another committee or even add another time slot this week, which wasn't unfortunately possible. But he's given us 3 meeting dates of his availability. The first 3 meetings back in when we're back in January. Minister Anand is scheduled for Thursday, January 28th. With respect for the affordability and accessibility study, as you know, we had the representatives from Bell scheduled on December 1st, but we had that 1064 meeting, so they were had to be rescheduled. They are holding Tuesday, January 26th for them to come back. So I just wanted to give you guys all of the information that I have. We've also, as I said, inquired with the clerk, the head clerk, and the whips about adding meetings next week, so the week of December 14th. Negotiations amongst the parties still ongoing, including discussions about extended hybrid sittings. I've also let all of our witnesses know that should we be able to add additional meetings outside of those dates, that I will be back in touch with them to see if we can get them in sooner. So I wanted you to all have the same information all at the same time so that you can schedule accordingly. So any updates that we have, the clerk will definitely send you an update as soon as we have it. Now, with that, I'd like to just go over the rules for today's meeting. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, please proceed as you usually would with the whole committee meeting in person in the committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair and that your mic should be on mute when you are not speaking. With regard to the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain the order of speaking for all members. If there's any changes, please notify the clerk and he will notify me accordingly. As is my normal practice, and some of the witnesses have been with us before, you will see the yellow card when you have 30 seconds remaining in your intervention, and I will wave the red card for when your time for your intervention is up. I ask that you please respect the time limit so that all of the members can get their questions in. The House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology is meeting today to continue its study on the accessibility and affordability of telecommunication services in Canada. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses, and for the sake of time, I won't read all of your titles because they are in the notice of meeting. From the Canadian Communications Systems Alliance, we have Mr. Jay Thompson and Mr. Ian Stevens. From Public Interest Advocacy Centre, Mr. John Lawford. From the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, Robert Giz and Eric Smith. From Tech Savvy Solutions, Mr. Andy Kaplan-Mirth. From FSET Information Technology, Mr. David Brown. And from the Samuel Gloshko Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic, Tamir Israel. And with that, each witness will present for up to 5 minutes, followed by a round of questions. So we will start with the Canadian Communications Systems Alliance. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Ian Stevens, and I'm a board member of the Canadian Communications Systems Alliance, or CCSA. I'm also CEO of Execulink Telecom, based in Woodstock, Ontario. Joining me today is CCSA's CEO, Jay Thompson. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in your important deliberations regarding accessibility and affordability of telecommunications services. Mr. Thompson and I last appeared before you in May when you were examining Canada's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. At that time, Mr. Thompson presented our opening remarks. Today is my turn. CCSA's members are small and mid-sized facilities-based communications companies serving mostly rural parts of Canada. Our members are helping the government achieve its universal broadband goal by delivering speeds to their communities which meet or even exceeds the 50 by 10 objective. Our members would also like to bring the benefit of mobile competition to their communities, but in most cases, the incumbents are preventing them from doing so. It is an economic reality in this country that government help is needed to extend broadband to Canadians who remain unserved or underserved. And government help is also needed so more Canadians can access affordable, competitive mobile telephone services. I think it is fair to say that because of my role at Execulink and in the CCSA, I've gained intimate and practical knowledge regarding what works and what is still needed to advance accessibility and affordability in telecom services in rural Canada. My company has benefited from various government funding awards to help extend or improve broadband service in southwestern Ontario, including a First Nations community. None of those projects has had a standalone business case. It took government funding to make them happen. Central to government funding programs is the goal of affordability. Generally, affordability is assessed by comparing prices to be charged in a rural setting to urban prices. We are aware of situations where Canadians are paying more than $200 per month only to receive extremely poor service. Those situations certainly don't seem affordable to us. That said, we caution against strictly using urban prices as the benchmark for affordability in rural Canada. As committee members from rural ridings know, the time and cost to visit every constituent's door increases proportionate to the geography you serve. The same applies to us. While urban ISPs contemplate doors served per kilometer, in rural areas, it's kilometers per door. On a per customer basis, it simply costs more to build and maintain broadband services in rural areas. That means that absent government funding to offset those extra costs, rural retail prices must often be higher than urban prices, even with one-time capital injections available from current broadband funding programs. And that means that unless the government is willing to subsidize rural operating costs, funding programs should not penalize rural providers who must charge higher prices to serve their rural customers. Madam Chair, we share the view of other witnesses that Canada needs a coordinated broadband strategy. Currently, we have a myriad of municipal, provincial, and federal funding programs. They all have similar goals and strong support, but those programs are not aligned on their timing, their objectives, their focus, or commitment to execution. As a result, they compete for potential applicants' limited time and resources. For that reason, we fear that in terms of solving the rural broadband problem, those various programs will actually end up accomplishing less than the sum of their parts. Furthermore, given that consumer consumption always increases, and it takes time to build out advanced broadband networks, government programs need to invest not to meet today's needs, but those of 2030 and beyond. To that end, fiber should always be the first choice where possible. All other technologies will require constant reinvestment and a hope for technology breakthroughs to meet the needs of Canadians. In our business, hope is not a strategy. Fiber, however, will continue to serve Canadians for generations to come. CCSA thanks you again for this opportunity, and we look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Lawford. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Public Interest Advocacy Center is a national nonprofit and registered charity that provides legal and research services on behalf of consumers, and in particular, vulnerable consumers. PIAC has been active in the field of communications law for over 40 years. Yes, we have a broadband problem in Canada. PIAC has consistently attempted to change this at the CRTC in submissions to the government, as part of coalitions with Acorn Canada and the National Pensioners Federation, making demands for low-income and seniors groups, and with open media in a project called Get Canada Connected during COVID-19. However, progress is elusive, even to the point of our despair. Lower income Canadians' broadband internet penetration levels are lower than the highest income Canadians, that is 70% versus 98%. Similarly, rural and remote access is considerably lower, especially at the higher speeds, such as the CRTC's 50 up 10, 50 down, 10 megabit up per second target speed for broadband internet. Rural access is at less than 40%, and First Nations lands less than 30%, whereas the all Canada average, including urban, is well over 80%. Full coverage of rural and remote Canada is promised only in 2030, at which time the 50-10 megabits per second speed undoubtedly will be inadequate for the functions a broadband then enjoys in cities. This is too late. PIAC believes that broadband access and affordability can be addressed in 4 steps. First, Canada should adopt a clear universal service obligation, such as that in the United States. The Broadcasting and Telecommunications Legislative Review Panel final report in January of this year recommended a USO for Canada. Canada has never had a legislatively mandated universal service obligation. A true USO means the telecommunications carriers and regulators and the government must all work together to deliver service to all. It's the law, it can be measured and enforced. Parliament can make this change. Without this legal basis, nothing else is possible. Step 2, PIAC recommended in 2 research reports on telecommunications affordability that communication services are affordable where, as a guideline, they make up at most 4 to 6% of a household income. Low-income Canadians pay about 8 to 10% of their household income at the moment, often for fewer services than other Canadians. Canadians are willing to pay through their telecommunications bills a small levy to support affordable universal service to Canadians. PIAC asked Environics to survey Canadians in 2016 as part of submissions on a major broadband proceeding at CRTC. It showed most Canadians would pay 50 cents more per month on their internet bills to support low-income broadband access. Without a statutory USO, with affordability as a clear goal, the CRTC consistently has refused to create a subsidy for broadband access. This divides Canadians. Step 3, the CRTC has undermined the broadband project by recently moving to phase out the National Contribution Fund, or NCF. The NCF has for decades funded above-cost operation of telephone service in rural areas. It should be transitioned to a broadband contribution fund. Operating broadband in rural areas will always be above cost in many places. The US has such an operating support for broadband. Without it, we will have networks we cannot afford to run outside cities. Step 4, Canada continues to pump billions of dollars into building broadband infrastructure. Everyone in this space, from the smallest cooperatives to the largest telcos, consumer groups, MPs, all complain about fragmented Government of Canada operation of these funds. Bring them all under one body, call it a broadband czar. Those are our thoughts, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next witness is the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Oh, Mr. Giz, you're on mute.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning to represent the wireless industry. La pandémie a changé la vie des Canadiens. Ça a changé la...
The pandemic has changed Canadians' lives. It's changed the way that we work and we get access to our essential services. This situation attests just to the extent that telecommunication services are vital for our survival, our health and our well-being, and to support economic and social activities in Canada.
Canada's facilities-based providers have been focused on ensuring Canadians can continue to rely on the high-quality networks and services to which they are accustomed. Years of investing in network infrastructure has resulted in networks that are incredibly resilient in the face of intensified traffic and altered use patterns. In fact, according to Accenture, 90% of Canadians surveyed said their service provider's response to COVID-19 has met or exceeded their expectations. While the vast majority of Canadians have access to reliable advanced telecommunication services, the impact of COVID-19 also highlighted the fact that some communities remain underserved. Closing this gap in connectivity is imperative, as the future of many communities and their citizens depends on having internet access and being able to participate in the digital economy. That is why, working in partnership with governments at all levels, Canada's facilities-based carriers are continuing to expand telecommunications infrastructure into hard-to-serve communities. But just as today's network's performance is the result of past policy decisions, securing access to high-quality and affordable telecommunications services for all Canadians requires the right regulatory framework, one that balances the three key objectives of quality, coverage, and affordable prices. Canada's telecommunication policy has long recognized the importance of facilities-based competition as the best way to drive competition, while also encouraging the level of private sector investment needed to build world-class networks. In Canada's mobile wireless industry, facilities-based competition has resulted in intense competition amongst national and regional network operators. This has led to a steady decline in prices, higher quality service, and expanded coverage. For example, according to the CRTC, the price per gigabyte of mobile data declined by 56% from 2015 to 18. PwC has also recently estimated that the introduction of unlimited data plans is expected to reduce the cost per gigabyte of data by 50% from 2018 to the end of this year. Equally important, Canada's facilities-based carriers are continuing to invest in upgrading and expanding the reach of Canada's wireless network. To date, Canada's facilities-based wireless providers have invested over $50 billion in capex to build Canada's wireless networks and have also spent more than $20 billion on spectrum costs. Grâce à ces investissements.
Thanks to these investments, Canadians will benefit from the fastest wireless networks in the world, even in rural areas. Our networks are faster than most global networks, including all countries of the G7 except for one.
CRTC reports that 4G LTE coverage is accessible to 99% of Canadians where they live at the end of 2018. CRTC data also shows rural 4G LTE coverage has expanded rapidly over the last few years, increasing from 35% in 2013 to reaching 95% of Canadians living in rural communities in 2018. But we know more work and more investments are needed to expand our networks and to introduce 5G. Yet, at a time when investing in the expansion and upgrading of Canada's digital infrastructure is more important than ever, regulatory measures are being considered that, if they proceed, will discourage private sector investment. With respect to the wireless industry, the CRTC is currently deliberating over whether to require wireless network operators to give resellers, or MVNOs, access to their networks at regulated rates. PwC has estimated that this will have a major impact on capital expenditures and that the communities that would be disproportionately impacted by these cuts are those that are the hardest to serve. While other developed countries are implementing policies and strategies to accelerate the rollout of 5G, it is estimated that mandating MVNO access in Canada would reduce the effective coverage of 5G in Canada by 2030 by 20%. This delay would result in an estimated cumulative loss of at least $57 billion in GDP. Simply put, mandated access, in particular mandated access at less than arm's length negotiated rates, negatively impacts network operators' capacity to invest in digital infrastructure. Let's build a stronger Canadian digitization economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giz. We now move to Mr. Kaplan-Murth. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Andy Kaplan-Murth, and I'm VP Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at TechSavvy, an independent Canadian internet and phone service provider based in southwestern Ontario and Gatineau, Quebec. TechSavvy has been serving customers for over 20 years. Today, we have over 300,000 customers in every province. TechSavvy has always defended some very important values concerning the internet. We believe in affordable, competitive access, as well as network neutrality and our customers' privacy rights. In our home territory in southwestern Ontario, we connect customers on network facilities that we build. Elsewhere, to reach customers where we have not built our own networks, we buy wholesale services from the large incumbent carriers. Wholesale-based competitors like us serve more than 1 million households and businesses. 7 months ago, I told this committee that the entire framework for telecom competition was at a breaking point and competitors were at risk of disappearing. The situation today is dire. If we don't protect broadband competition, especially during the uncertain times of this pandemic, then the result will be less affordable internet services and less investment in underserved communities. Since my last appearance here, TechSavvy and the competitive broadband industry have seen some victories and some setbacks concerning wholesale rates and our access to modern fiber networks. After the CRTC set final rates in August 2019, correcting inflated rates going back 4 years, TechSavvy passed on the benefits of those lower rates to consumers by lowering our prices. However, the incumbents got a stay, preventing those rates from coming into effect. They also filed multiple appeals. In August, the Governor and Council responded, and while it did not overrule the CRTC, their decision adopted the incumbents' false position that investment and competition need to be balanced against one another. In September 2020, the Federal Court of Appeal unanimously dismissed the incumbents' appeals to that court, saying their issues were of dubious merit. Despite that ruling, competitors had another setback when the CRTC suspended their own final rates, leaving in place the inflated rates that the CRTC itself already found to be unjust and unreasonable. Meanwhile, the incumbents have been targeting us with anti-competitive retail practices that are retail prices that are below the wholesale rates that they themselves inflated. In February, TechSavvy filed a complaint with the Competition Bureau seeking an inquiry into some of that anti-competitive conduct. After being squeezed by incumbents for years and having lowered our prices expecting the CRTC to implement its final rates, by late 2019, TechSavvy was losing money. As a result, TechSavvy had to make the difficult decision to raise prices twice in the past year. In some cases, absurdly, we've had to set our prices higher than the same incumbents who sell us wholesale services. And now, instead of losing money, we're losing customers. We remain hopeful that the CRTC will reaffirm its earlier rates and that the government will trust these experts who have spent years poring over thousands of pages of evidence. Those rates and a retroactive correction to years of overpayments are critical not only for competitors, but also for connecting people in underserved areas. Despite the widespread rhetoric, TechSavvy and other competitors do invest in network facilities. TechSavvy's 5-year investment plan, funded by ownership and private capital, totals over $250 million, including over $100 million for high-speed network facilities connecting 60,000 residents and businesses in underserved communities across southwestern Ontario. As important as they are, all of these issues about wholesale rates are for access to aging legacy technologies. 5 years ago, the CRTC determined that competitors need access to modern fiber to the home networks, but we still don't have access to them. And that's not to mention the mobile sector, where we have no service-based competition and where mobile rates remain some of the highest in the world. Canada needs to accelerate the deployment of networks to underserved areas. To accomplish that, a broadband plan must include competition by design, and it must reject the false dichotomy between investment and competition. TechSavvy is demonstrating that we can have both. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. David Brown. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Morning, everyone. Happy to be here and speak to everybody about the work we've been doing and some of the challenges we have in Northwestern Ontario. My name is David Brown. I'm the CEO and co-owner of FSET. We're an information and technology services company based out of Kenora, Ontario. We provide services and solutions to both public and private sector, and we have more than 50 years of combined experience within law enforcement and another 40 or so plus in healthcare. Our customers are based out of Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec, and we have some other work that we're doing, not just here in Canada, but conversations outside of. I've spent the last 2 decades navigating infrastructure and communication challenges for Indigenous communities across the region here in Northwestern Ontario and advocating on their behalf. In September of 2020, I reached out to our local telco within the region in an attempt to purchase and upgrade much needed bandwidth for the community of Pikangikum First Nation. At the community's discretion and direction, and with money in hand, my instructions were to do whatever I had to improve their situation. This was my first attempt at improving their situation, but it certainly was not theirs. The lack of usable broadband available to them meant an inability for programs and services to be delivered to the community: health, education, mental health, justice, local government, financial services, legal services, the list goes on. And we're not talking about recreational use, we're talking about quality of life here for these communities. These attempts through traditional means, as was often the case in my 20 years of trying to do this for Indigenous communities, did not prove fruitful. Traditional services, terrestrial based solutions, telcos, this is what it's like for Indigenous communities to try and work with these companies, the big three within Canada. It is not because they provide the best or most reliable service. It is not because they are cost effective. It is not because they are agile and scalable. Just the opposite. It is a slow, cumbersome process, and there is no sense of urgency with regards to their deliverables. Terms and contracts are lengthy, typically 7 or 10 years is what they're looking for. There are early termination fees ranging anywhere from 50 to 100% of those 7 to 10 years that they're looking for. Pricing is uncertain, and additional fees and services can often and do often apply. From the initial dialogue and conversation, when we reach out to a telecommunication company, to the actual delivery of service, this process takes years. I've never been involved in a situation or a dialogue or a project where this hasn't taken years, a couple, 3, sometimes it can prove even more difficult. So this isn't just putting a shovel in the ground, this is just having dialogue to move these types of things along. Now, this is what business by default looks like. Again, it is not, there simply have been no other options. So these companies don't have to be efficient. They just have to be the only game in town, and therefore it's the only option for Indigenous services for which they have to work and try and navigate this with. That hasn't worked. It doesn't work. And it's kind of the way things have been. So we, after 8 months of trying to navigate this process yet again for the community of Pikangikum, the telco came back and offered 10% of the available bandwidth that this community already had. So the 100% that they had before I started this process was not enough. It was 1 gigabit of fiber to the community, and that was being shared through a cable plant for 400 homes and businesses and 2,000 residents. So I liken that to a apartment complex or a hotel with hundreds of users all turning the tap on, and you're trying to get water out of a half-inch main. When that happens, nobody gets water. And in this case, nobody was getting internet access. So that led us to approach things differently. So I began the process of trying to reach somebody within SpaceX to think differently, to do something differently. 20 years was enough for me. So I was tapping out. Satellite, agile, scalable, timely, cost and pricing can be easily calculated with SpaceX Starlink per home, per community, per region. This is true whether it's 1, 100, or 1,000 homes. From the time of purchase to serviceability, the process takes days, not years. The installation is simple, takes minutes before you're online, and just about anyone can do it. Consumers are under no obligations. There are no contracts and commitments. There are no early termination fees, and seasonal use is an option. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to your questions and providing feedback on the work we did in Kanchkum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. And we'll next go to Mr. Israel, who has just clicked on. So we're hopeful this will work. Mr. Israel, you have the floor for 5 minutes. You're still on mute.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
So thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Tamir Israel, and I'm staff lawyer with the Samuelson Glushko Canadian Internet Policy Public Interest Clinic. CIPIC is a public interest technology law clinic based at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law, and I'm testifying before you today from my home in Ottawa, which sits on unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. I would like to thank the committee for inviting us to testify before you today and for undertaking this important study. The ongoing pandemic has emphasized the essential nature of connectivity in Canada. Now more than ever, it is critical to ensure that Canadians may not only access but also afford data services. Canada continues to experience connectivity challenges, particularly in remote regions. Our communications complaints body recently identified quality of service problems to be the third highest source of complaints against fixed and mobile companies. Better documentation of current and ongoing challenges is an important step to securing high-speed connectivity for all Canadians. Additionally, the government's ongoing contributions to improving Canada's broadband networks are encouraging. However, this investment falls short of ambitious programs undertaken by governments such as Australia. While investments through programs such as the Universal Broadband Fund will certainly improve Canadians' ability to connect to the internet, a national approach might allow for more strategic government investment and deeper coordination across different funding programs. A national broadband plan could also address the management of key inputs such as spectrum and access to poles in a more strategic and coordinated manner. Such a plan might best be generated through the auspices of the CRTC, even if elements of its implementation might be dependent on other government bodies. CIPIC is encouraged to see affordability acknowledged as a central pillar in this committee's study. Particularly in mobile, Canadians receive a poor value proposition by global standards. In fact, Canada's mobile costs have been persistently high in comparison to its global peers for years, and it's important to understand the different ways that this undermines adoption. First, many Canadians do not subscribe to mobile data at all, despite relatively wide national coverage. Canada is 31st out of 37 OECD countries in terms of the number of per capita subscribers. Second, even among subscribers, high costs prevent Canadians from realizing the full potential of mobile data connectivity. Canada ranks 30th out of 36 OECD countries in terms of the amount of data used by an average subscriber in an average month, with Canadians using only half of the OECD average. We continue to fall further behind our peers on both these metrics, with average mobile subscriptions and data usage growing faster throughout the OECD region than in Canada. Finally, Canadian subscribers are too often called upon to choose between maintaining their mobile plan and other life necessities. A 2019 survey found that 20% of Toronto respondents who have had to skip meals indicated that their monthly phone bill was the cause. Rent and transportation were the other two top causes. Connectivity is essential, and Canada must do more to improve accessibility and affordability of its services. First, it is critical that we apply the wholesale model Canada has developed in the wireline context to mobile. There is an upper limit to how many wireless competitors will organically emerge. Mandating virtual access to mobile networks on a cost recovery plus basis is the only way to increase connectivity. Similarly, unused spectrum in rural areas must either be returned or be made available to competitors on a wholesale cost recovery basis. Second, we should consider amending the telecommunications policy objectives to emphasize factors such as affordability. Too often, critical affordability measures are defeated out of concern that these measures might impact investment in rural broadband. This largely presents a false choice. Profit margins among incumbent service providers in Canada are high by global standards, and a 2014 analysis by the Brattle Group found that Canadian wireless providers were generally earning above normal returns on their investments. These profit margins are sufficiently healthy to absorb a more competitive marketplace driven by wholesale on a cost recovery plus basis in both wireless and wireline. Our current regulatory model for connecting remote areas relies on a combination of service targets and a contribution fund to incentivize projects that would help meet these targets. If incumbent providers continue to respond to regulatory pressures by favoring world-leading profit margins and shareholder dividends at the cost of rural investment, the CRTC should increase the contribution fund amounts accordingly or move towards imposing direct service obligations. Finally, a fair mechanism for imposing temporary wholesale rates should be explored. The rate setting process is inherently complex, and it is important that the process is ultimately correct. However, the current process incentivizes incumbents to propose favorable rates at the outset, and as a result, competitors are persistently at a disadvantage. Given the degree to which a regulatory system is currently dependent on wholesale mechanisms for imposing price discipline, it is of central importance to expedite the availability of more accurate wholesale rates while the final rate setting process resolves itself. Those will be my opening comments for today. Thank you, and I welcome your questions. And thank you for your patience with my audio difficulties.
Thank you very much, Mr. Israel. So we'll now start our round of questions. The first round of questions goes to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think what we have heard this morning from all of the witnesses is that there is quite a disconnect between some of the things that we hear are going to happen because of whether it be government policy or telco's commitment to rural broadband, and some of the other things that are happening on the ground. And that this is part of what this study is about. We've been working on this for years, actually, to try to get some sort of certainty associated with it. But I think we've heard the diverse views here today. So I'd like to start my questioning, first of all, to Tech Savvy. As you pointed out, in early 2019, the CRTC announced a review of the Canadian wireless industry with the goal of enabling competition through mandated wholesale services for competitors known as the Mobile Virtual Network Operators, or MVNOs. And of course, we've seen the same process unfold for internet service providers. So in your final submission to the CRTC in July of 2020, you note, and I quote, "The value MVNOs can provide to Canadians comes not from simply lowering prices, but rather from creating new, innovative services that target underserved and unserved market niches that are not being served by existing players." But we hear on the other side that these MVNOs are causing issues with other groups. So first of all, I wonder if you could expand on the idea, and how would MVNOs do a better job of providing wireless services in let's say, central Alberta than the incumbent carriers?
So thanks for the question. The CRTC has taken a preliminary view that MVNOs are a necessary way to introduce more competition in the mobile network and the mobile market. And now, of course, we're waiting for a decision from them. MVNOs, of course, as a competitive option, should introduce pressure on pricing. So the obvious sort of competitive benefits in terms of price for consumers. But Tech Savvy also highlighted that MVNOs serve particular market niches, typically in countries where MVNOs exist. And actually, we saw this play out in Canada, not with MVNOs, but with small facilities-based providers like Wind. And going by memory, because we have to go back several years to remember these mobile competitors that were introduced, Public maybe, they appeared in cities. They were facilities-based. They introduced a competitive alternative, and they eventually were swallowed up by Canada's dominant incumbents. They serve communities, but of course within the footprints where the MNOs networks exist. So in rural Alberta, of course, an MVNO with wholesale services is only going to be available in communities where dominant provider already has a network with services. But when we talk about serving communities with unmet needs, and we're talking more about population groups, so it may be particular. It may be affordability, but it may also be particular cultural groups. It may be particular, subsectors of society who are just not served by the existing packages that are available.
And then back to you again. In February 2020, TechSavvy filed a complaint with the Competition Bureau against Bell and Rogers, and you mentioned that, and this for anti-competitive practice. Can you tell the committee what the gist of that complaint was?
Yeah, so this, just to pivot away from mobile, of course, and look back at the wholesale services that are really our bread and butter. That specifically addressed Bell and Rogers anti-competitive practices, where on the one hand, in front of the CRTC, they have inflated the wholesale rates for years that wholesale-based competitors like us pay, and that effectively keeps our competitive pricing high and doesn't allow us to discipline their pricing. So it keeps all retail internet pricing high across Canada. And then at the same time, starting in about 2016, Bell and Rogers both introduced flanker brands, which sort of pretend to be competitors but are not. They're brand names of the incumbents. And they introduced pricing that was specifically targeted at undercutting competitors' pricing. So on the one hand, they were keeping our pricing high, and on the other hand, they were undercutting us in the market. And our complaint makes the argument that that's an abuse of dominance. And it has really squeezed us for the past years, where we're unable to price our services low enough to discipline their pricing, which is what a competitor should be able to do. And if we raise our pricing so that we operate within the rates that they've set, then we lose customers because flanker brands are offering services at lower rates.
I see that I only have a few seconds left, so I will see that for a later round. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, MP Dreeshen. We'll now go to MP Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much. My first question is for Mr. Giz. We have a reseller market, a long-standing reseller market when it comes to broadband. Why would a reseller market be so detrimental when it comes to mobile?
Great question. I think you have to look at the difference between the two. And in the mobile market, it's a relatively new market, speaking. It's really only 15 or 20 years old. And both governments' policies over the last 20 years has been to create more competition to help have quality networks that have good coverage and that are affordable. But it's taking a while for that to happen. So you have the three incumbents, and you also have the new entrants that are now coming in and starting to make a difference in the marketplace. And if MVNOs, mandated MVNOs, so we do have MVNOs already in Canada, we just don't have mandated MVNOs. If mandated MVNOs come in, the first target that they're going to go after is going after these new entrants or regional players that are trying.
Can I pause just for a second, though?
Yeah. Yeah.
All of those arguments apply to the mandated reseller space for broadband. So why are you making these arguments in the one context but not the other?
Well, number one, I just represent the wireless industry, and it is there are differences associated with it. So I can just really answer from the wireless industry. Plus, you're also seeing it on the other side on broadband as well, which is not necessarily my file. But when that TPIA decision did come out, we saw where all players, including the smaller players in Canada, were arguing that it was going to hurt them to be able to make investments. So at the end of the day, the point we're trying to make is that mandated MVNOs in the wireless industry will first of all undercut the new entrants, which are the ones that are creating the competition that's helping to drive down prices and do more build outs across the country today.
Thanks very much. To Tech Savvy, does any of that make sense to you?
No, I think your question, the premise of your question is right. These are essentially the same economics at play and the same policy goals. We're trying to introduce competition on networks that do require investment. Wholesale-based service level competition is a proven way to do that on broadband networks, and essentially the same thing will also work on mobile.
If anything, it seems to me we're squeezing the resellers. And to your point, Tech Savvy, and the wholesale rate conversation, walk me through why, as a consumer, I used to be a consumer of Tech Savvy, why, as a consumer, where I haven't seen increased quality, but I've seen increased costs significantly over the last 5 years. Why would that be?
Can I just clarify? Do you mean increased cost from competitors or overall in internet services?
Overall, in home internet services, I can't find, in my home internet service, at least in the east end of Toronto, a package that I paid for 5 years ago for less than, say, $60.
I mean, right now, home internet services are really dictated for competitors and for retail. They are really dictated by the wholesale rates that incumbents have set. You know, by inflating those wholesale rates, which really goes back all the way to 2011 probably, or earlier when those rates were first set, by inflating those rates, they have really prevented competitors from being able to introduce pricing that would discipline, you know, internet pricing across the board. So, you know, look, you can just look at what the CRTC's rates are, what the current wholesale rates are for specific services that you buy, and you can look at what the CRTC found a just and reasonable rate for that service ought to be in August 2019, and those are the rates that incumbents are fighting. If you do look that up, you'll see specific prices that are lower than the pricing that's in the market. Of course, it's more complicated than just the individual speeds, but it'll give you an idea of the disparity between the inflated rates and the sort of just and reasonable pricing it ought to be.
And very simply, you would simply say the CRTC should stick with what they initially proposed.
Look, I think the CRTC has all the evidence in front of them to make a decision. They spent 3 years deliberating about it and arrived at a decision in August 2019. And I think that that when they do the same thing on a review, it's not about policy goals about how much Bell or other companies should be able to invest. I think it's I think that they'll arrive at the same pricing. Yes.
And Mr. Giz, I don't want to put you entirely on the spot, but I did read recently in the Financial Post that Rogers and TELUS received, I think it was $63 million from the wage subsidy, but then TELUS paid out dividends. It makes me uncomfortable. Does it make you uncomfortable?
I can't answer individual members' questions, but I do know this is that our industry, and even I believe you were at the committee hearing the other day when the chair of the CRTC, Ian Scott, was there, and he talked about how our industry stepped up to put out programs to help individuals and to help their customers and companies in the healthcare and governments during COVID-19. So our industry did respond to some of the issues out there.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est député Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, the floor is yours for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And to start, I'd like to thank you, Mr. McPherson, Mr. Chairman, for having done so well in doing everything that you've achieved. Now, I'd ask you to respond very briefly. There were a number of briefs. There was a lot of interesting stuff that you said in terms of competition. I'd like to start with Mr. Stevens, please. My team and I met with a number of members of your network in Quebec. Now, you said that the government's financial assistance is important to guarantee prices both urban and rural. So affordability isn't the only factor. There are geographic factors, and we need to play a complementary role to the government, you said, unless the government subsidizes things. Otherwise, consumers will pay more. Is it fair? Is it just? I don't think so. The government said that you said that the government needs to invest in cutting-edge technology such as fibre optic, and SpaceX referred to that. You said that that will be more sustainable and more useful for Canadians. And is that part of the programs that the federal government has put in place?
Thank you for your question. I'll dive into the use of fiber optics as the technology of choice that I talked about. The programs that ExecuLink has taken advantage of are fiber first, and it's been a long-standing position of the CCSA that facilities are the best way. I guess terrestrial facilities are the best way to get sustainable long-term broadband services delivered to Canadians. Monsieur Lemire, there's some other questions buried in your ask, and I didn't quite catch them all. Could you? Is there a particular area you want to dig into, and I'll focus on that?
Yes, if you could talk about the programs, please. Do you think that the programs are the biggest break currently in terms of accessibility and affordability for all Canadians in the rural areas?
I think, thank you. So I think where areas, where we're investing, where our members are investing is in our communities, and where we stop investing is when the business case dies, where the retail rate and the cost to build and serve our networks don't connect. And that's where the programs that we've been accessing and other CCSA members have been accessing have been bridging the gap. They've been helping us with one-time capital injection to build beyond a traditional geographic boundary in areas where the cost to service homes per or kilometers for every home don't make the business case come true. So that's where we've been focusing on. And within those programs, as I mentioned in my remarks, there's generally as part of the funding application is an ask on what your retail rates are going to look like for the next few years. And they do test that every whether it's municipal, federal, or provincial. So far, what we've seen is a test for affordability to make sure that when they do fund it, that the funding group has a sense on whether or not it's going to make sense for the people that get connected at the end of the wire.
Est-ce que, selon vous,
in your opinion, do the bulk sellers put a brake on the small distributors' activities? Is that a problem to get all of Canadians and Quebecers connected?
I missed the first part in translation. I apologize. Are you talking about wholesalers for small operators?
Exact.
So that's right, exactly.
That Tech Savvy has been addressing today is focused on the large incumbents, and there has been a need and a desire for many of the networks that have been funded from public sector to have an open access policy. And I don't know examples of operators that have tried to access that. So I can't really comment on wholesale access to small network provider networks.
Dernière question.
Final question. How many of your members have filed complaints in relation to these wholesale companies? And are some not able to file complaints, but they'd like to do so, but they just don't have enough time or financial resources? And what are the obstacles they face?
Today, I'm focused as a representative of CCSA and can't really speak to the wholesalers' ability to complain, and perhaps a different witness could address that. Thank you for your questions.
Merci. Thank you. Our next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the updated schedule as well, too. With regards to, the spectrum auction, Mr. Lawford, I'm going to go to you first. We've collected successive governments around $22 billion in revenues from selling the spectrum, which is public space and is an asset. Not all of that has gone back into providing services, and there's been a series of programs rolled out, over the years. Just wondering what your thoughts are on the upcoming spectrum auction. I believe it's broken, the process we have. It's incurred additional costs for consumers, and I think more other countries that have done more of an RFP process that guarantees the use of spectrum that you purchase within timeframes and reaches citizens in areas as obligation, and also has some obligations on the cost structure, would be a better approach. But so I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Sure, thank you. I believe that there should be more conditions on the spectrum auction in terms of rural build out, and there should also be a process for use it or lose it spectrum. A lot of times it gets sat upon with vague plans to put it into practice that are not followed up on by the industry department. Excuse me. The question of whether you should change the process from an auction to something more like a beauty contest, which is, I think, what you're referring to, is a really fraught one. And years ago, PIAC opposed moving to an auction model for the reasons that you give, which is you lose control to some extent, and it becomes an economic exercise. And the economic incentive of making money from this thing outweighs all the other concerns. This committee, I think, can certainly put a recommendation in to put very stringent coverage requirements for those getting spectrum, and also for use it or lose it. That has not always been adhered to in the past. So I would definitely encourage this committee to consider that, and changing the auction probably a little too far down the track by this point.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Gitz, maybe can I get your opinion on the use it or lose it? I mean, and also like the spectrum auction, as far as I'm concerned, we've created a toll booths in the sky. It's really important to recognize, even before the pandemic, that broadband and access at an affordable rate is an essential service for Canadians, especially as we move more online services. Before COVID-19, closing bricks and mortar government services, and then more schooling and so forth. And then with COVID, it's gone on. So, Mr. Gitz, what's your opinion with regards to use it or lose it in your association?
Well, I take your point and agree with it on the cost associated with spectrum in Canada. You and I have had this discussion many times. You've had some interesting ideas on how to use those dollars. But you're right, it's been over $20 billion. We're probably the most expensive country in the world when it comes to our spectrum costs. Obviously, those costs get passed along to the customers. And we think that making spectrum cheaper and more available is something that would help, reduce down costs, increase build outs. But as you know, my members, some of them have some different opinions on spectrum. So I've got to be a little careful on going into details. But those are my general comments with regards to spectrum.
Yeah, no, and I know it's still it's difficult because there's so many opinions and players. I guess what I'm looking at is a spectrum auction that perhaps maybe takes less revenue in the forefront, but has some obligations with base services for Canadians as part of the obligation. Again, the $22 billion that the government has brought in, only a fraction of that has actually been used in a series of subsidiary programs to try to actually fill in the black holes that are difficult to make revenue off of because they're rural or they're at different challenges or whatever. If I could ask Mr. Kaplan, if Mirth, if you're, I guess, if your situation doesn't change right now, do you kind of support like a stronger CRTC, I guess, view of a regulation right now? Is that something that would be having the regulator have a stronger position to be able to make decisions that are quicker and more enforceable in the market to ensure competition?
The short answer is I think the CRTC has the tools that they need to do this. They have the authority to regulate in these areas. and they could make decisions more quickly. I imagine it's operational challenges that prevent that. I don't think that major systemic change is required for them to do it, but it may be more of a what the expectations are. The one thing I would say about that is that the CRTC does have the authority to bring administrative monetary penalties against parties who, under certain circumstances, and they have not done so in the at least telecom regulatory space. And we think that that could be an important way to ensure compliance with regulatory obligations.
Okay, thank you. And to Mr. Brown, how do you view?
Unfortunately, Mr. Massey, you're out of time completely.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you on the screen. Sorry, Madam Chair. I don't have you on my screen. Thank you.
No problem. So we'll now start our second round of questions. And the first round of questions goes to MP Nader. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you to all our witnesses. We have a large panel today with a great discussion so far. I want to start briefly with Mr. Stevens and Mr. Kaplan-Murth. Both of you represent businesses located in southwestern Ontario. Be curious to both of you whether you had applied to the Connect to Innovate program for projects in southern Ontario, and whether either of your businesses were successful in those applications.
Thanks. So Execulink has applied through SWIFT, and our funding in the last few years has come through the SWIFT program, which is funded both provincially and federally. And I think the federal portion is coming from ISED. That's tied, I'm not sure directly to CTI, but it's tied into a similar funding envelope.
TechSavvy has also applied to through SWIFT and have been awarded some SWIFT funds for network builds, including at an Indigenous community on a reserve at Moravian Town, and other places in Chatham-Kent, through Connect to Innovate as well for fixed wireless services. And of course, the new Universal Broadband Fund includes a rapid response stream that is very interesting to us, as we have a number of projects that could be developed very quickly if you could just bridge that gap.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kaplan-Murth. And that was actually where my next question was going to go, whether there was the intention to apply through that program. So I'm glad to hear that that is the intention. Mr. Stevens, is that the same plan for yourself with Execulink and a number of your members, and whether or not you're aware of different organizations who have already applied to that program?
So at Execulink, we're studying carefully the programs, including the rapid funding stream, which has some aggressive deadlines for construction completion. So we're reviewing them carefully. I really can't speak for other members, and perhaps Mr. Thompson can weigh in if he has knowledge that he can share.
We know that many of our members are quite interested in the new fund and appreciate that the changes have been made to try to reduce the complexity of the application process. So we anticipate that many of them will be filing something by the deadline.
Thank you for that, and I do appreciate the comment on the aggressive deadlines, and I would be curious to circle back in the months to come to see how those deadlines are being met. I do want to turn to Mr. Brown and the partnership with SpaceX. Now, I'm very well aware that this is a very, very recent in terms of the first receipt of the hardware, but be curious to know how that is going thus far. Has it been successful in implementing the project on the ground?
Yeah, no. Once the ISED approvals came, the unit shipped right away. We took receipt of them here in Kenora, and then booked flights up to Kanchka. So within 20 minutes of being on the ground, we went from the airport to the health hub. We unboxed the unit on the ground outside, ran cable inside to draw power, and we were video conferencing from Kanchka. It really is that simple, as it's been designed to be. It is that it's everything they say it is and more. So the first 15 units we installed over the course of 3 days with the community to build capacity building in the community. So we had members of the community assist with those deployments. There really isn't much to it. Ridgeline mount goes on the roof. There's no penetration. You don't have to drill into the roof. You run the cable inside, you plug it in, and away you go. And then those members started doing the installations for the community. So they now have on their way to 60 units in total deployed, and they've requested more units from SpaceX, which we're discussing with them to procure on their behalf. And that agreement is directly between SpaceX and the community of Kanchkum. We're not a partner reseller in any way.
Thank you for that. And I've got about 30 seconds left.
Sure.
But following up on that, what are the speeds looking like so far in the community in terms of download and upload speeds in the community?
Yeah, we're seeing about 130 down or so. SpaceX Starlink, it is the better than nothing beta. They're saying anywhere from 50 to 150, but I think they're being kind and very cautious. But we were seeing speeds above 100 megs and 20 and 30 up. I think of equal or more importance is the latency. So the latency has been around 30 milliseconds or so. So that allows them to do business in real time. So.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And I would just note that right now on Parliament Hill, my speed is about 79. So that's good to know.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we'll now go to MP Jacek. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to all our witnesses. I would like to ask Mr. Lawford a few questions. I was pleased to hear about your partnership with ACORN, an organization with which I'm very familiar, and I'm glad to hear you're assisting them. Now, you made 4 recommendations. And first of all, you referred to a universal service obligation, something that is present in the US. Could you elaborate as to exactly what this entails, how it's working? Is it enforceable? Just give us a picture of it.
Sure. The United States has a universal service obligation, which they put in their act many years ago, and it requires all U.S. citizens to have an affordable and upgraded connection to telecommunication services, which the FCC has interpreted as including broadband and wireless. And therefore, they have undertaken at the FCC a number of auctions of spectrum, as well as a number of rollout programs in some key areas: education, schools, medicine, and tribal lands, what they call down there tribal lands, and another rural program to try to get everyone who has challenges or special needs onto the network more quickly. So they have a whole broadband plan. I don't know if the committee is aware the U.S. National Broadband Plan, which was written a number of years ago, cost itself $1 billion to write. But they do have a game plan, and they're following it more or less, and they have made great strides. We don't have a national broadband plan, and the reason why is in our law, there is a policy objective in the Telecommunications Act, which talks about affordable access for all Canadians in rural and urban areas, but it is one of among 7 other objectives. So it often gets crowded out because other objectives are competing, if you will, for the regulator's time, and that really puts a wrench into the CRTC's efforts to do things like to mandate rollouts of programs in rural areas, whether they're below cost or not, to create subsidies and funds to either support user access or to support the companies, as I said, who are trying to operate in areas where they're, let's face it, they're going to lose money because there are not enough customers and there's a lot of cost to backhaul the data to the larger urban centers. And that will always be the case. So we're missing the key legal piece, and that's why I'm trying to address this committee to think about a recommendation to Parliament. I know it's difficult, but to go back and amend the Telecommunications Act. And the US section is 47 USC, 47 USC, I'll find it for you, but it's one of those things that has been in law there for a long time.
Thank you for that. So, in your view, this has made a substantial difference for those potentially marginalized communities or those with inadequate access to data. It really has made a difference in the U.S.?
Yes, because it's the legal basis for taking all of the other planning that you need to do, building, and then supporting through subsidies, and finally, getting into people's hands through buying subsidies. Without that, no one can make private companies that do run our system do anything at the end of the day, and that's the key piece that's legally missing. And then the coordination, as I mentioned, through a broadband plan and a department to run it that's dedicated would help a lot.
Thank you. Now, your second recommendation was essentially that everybody pay a little bit more to ensure that, in fact, again, the hard to serve have funds available to implement broadband access. And you quoted an Environics survey that, in fact, reinforced the position that a majority of people would actually support that, which in a way is not surprising because I think we all have far-flung relatives and friends, and we want to communicate with them, whether we're in an urban area or not. Just 30 seconds. You mentioned a fund that the CRTC is phasing out. Could you just give us the name of that fund and a little bit more info?
The National Contribution Fund has been in place for 30 years for rural telephone service. The CRTC decided when broadband came along to phase it out. We believe that's a huge mistake. We believe it should be continued and broadband funding added onto it, and that it's totally achievable at a cost of about $1 to $2 at most per subscriber.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est député Lemire. Vous avez la parole.
MP Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll continue with Mr. Brown, if I may. Thank you very much for your recommendations. I have a similar interpretation to you. Now, one of the main problems of companies that want to roll out internet in the regions is access to infrastructure. The big providers' networks. That seems abusive, preventing competitors, big and small, to set up shop. It seems to be anti-competitive under the law. Is it an anti-competitive practice, in your opinion?
Well, I certainly think that what I've called business by default, at least here in Northwestern Ontario, is really essentially it's a monopoly. We just don't have choices or options. I think the use of satellite, Starlink, SpaceX technology allows and is the only path forward for at least Indigenous communities, perhaps rural municipalities. The ability to deliver this in a timely manner, scalable, without terrestrial-based solutions is probably the only way that's an effective use of taxpayer dollars and a way to invest in something that's going to help these communities. So I think that there is an advantage there. I think when I look at the Universal Broadband Fund and my understanding of it, and by no means an expert, the only qualification, the only application that Indigenous communities that would apply for that makes sense is the rapid response stream. That rapid response stream allows them to apply because of the on-premise component of the Starlink kits. But we've got to do that in quick turnaround. These communities need to understand what they're applying for. The deadline is January 15th. I really think that a lot of this wasn't necessarily intended, but it's written for telecommunication companies. It's not written for SpaceX Starlink. If the goal is to bring internet and broadband access to these Indigenous communities, because they're typically closed over the holiday season for 2 weeks, like many of us taking holidays. They've got to navigate COVID and community shutdowns. And we're asking them to do something online, which there is irony to, because they don't have that access right now. So I really think that hopefully we can get some funding through the rapid response stream for these communities, but it is not necessarily first come, first serve, but it is first in, first out. And I think they're at a disadvantage when it comes to that.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Our next round of MP Massey, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, I'm going to go back to Mr. Lawford with regards to the suggestion you made about a broadband czar. Would that be something that would be time limited? Would it be something that you would, I guess, have some type of a structure of consultation? I'm interested in about that as a coordinating piece, because we have so many moving parts with programs that are sunsetting, some are continuing, and so forth. Can you just give us a little more detail on that, please?
Our frustration at the moment is that some pieces are run out of CRTC, some out of ISED, and I'm making it a bit up on the fly, Mr. Mass, to be honest, because we don't have a national broadband plan that has tapped a particular agency to do this. But whoever it is, or whichever ad hoc department, I would hope that they would be able to coordinate separately from CRTC and industry because of the parochialism in those two areas, and I would hope that they would be able to contact and work with the provinces.
Yeah, but it's, you know what, and thanks for that. And I come from the auto sector, where we've had an auto czar off and on at different times to help coordinate the moving parts of not only just jurisdictional trade issues and cross-border and so forth. So it's actually it's a worthy idea to explore, even if it's a transitional piece to create a working plan. So I know my time is up, Madam Chair, but thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to MP Sloan. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm just going to talk to Mr. Kaplan Mirth for a few questions here. And I just wanted to ask him in regards to the CRTC's 2019 decision. As far as I understand it, the rates have not obviously been implemented yet, and there was a court decision that upheld the rates, and now we're seeing the CRTC review their initial decision, which was upheld by a court. Is there any good reason for the delay on implementing the rates right now? And if you could comment on that, that'd be great.
Well, no, we don't think that there is. When the decision came out in August 2019, it was appealed. The incumbents appealed it 3 different ways. The government petition has been shut down. The Federal Court of Appeal process, they lost there. Now they're appealing that to the Supreme Court, but we'll have to see if the Supreme Court will even hear it. And of course, they asked the CRTC to review the decision. And where it stands right now is they asked, while the CRTC is reviewing it, they asked the CRTC to put a stay on those rates, and the CRTC granted them that. TechSavvy is actually challenging that decision in court now. We've asked for a judicial review of that decision to stay the rates because no, we think that it is unreasonable. Look, this isn't the basis of our complaint there, but at a high level, essentially competitors have carried the burden of these higher rates all of this time. And the CRTC had already found that those rates are going to come down. Decision after decision is finding against the incumbents. We think it's certainly time to implement those rates or at least part of those rates on a going forward basis, if nothing else, so that we can start to see the benefits of those rates in competition.
Now, can I ask you to expand on earlier you had stated that the minister's statement that came out in August on balancing investment with affordability is incorrect, or it's a false dichotomy. If you could just quickly summarize why that's the case.
Yeah, so I mean, the Governor and Council's decision did not overturn the rates, and I want to acknowledge that they said that this is already before the CRTC and that they should take care of it. So in that sense, that's a good thing. But it also made a comment about that the rates may not, in all cases, have achieved the right balance between investment and affordability. And that was a real concern to us and to the competitive industry as a whole, because it just signaled that the government doesn't seem to have recognized or acknowledged that that competitors, when we get those lower rates and when we get the refunds for the money that we've overpaid all of these years, will invest that money in the economy, including in facilities and in our networks. So the idea that, I mean, to arrive at a conclusion that low rates necessarily means low investment, basically requires that you also believe that only the incumbents are going to invest. Yes, the incumbents get lower revenues from wholesale rates than they do from a captured retail market where they can charge whatever they want. Of course, that's the idea of competition. But when competitors are healthy and participating in that economy and don't, aren't, well, their revenue is not tied up in incumbents, then competitors can also take that money and invest it in facilities and in their communities in different ways. You know, so that was our concern about that statement from the government. It reflected this idea that there's this kind of balance or trade-off between investment and competition.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly ask you. You described a very troubling scenario whereby the larger providers are undercutting their own wholesale rates, which they've argued to maintain. Can you explain how we know that the wholesale rates are inflated quickly? It seems that CRTC is taking over a year to decide this in final. How do we know? It seems like it should be fairly obvious, but you as an expert, if you could just explain that. I believe we're out of time. I apologize.
Yeah, very, very quickly.
I guess I would say it's a technical issue, but I would read the CRTC's decision on costing. They're the experts. And just look at, there's a public version of TechSavvy's complaint to the Competition Bureau that details how we arrive at our pricing and how it is then impossible for us to compete really with the flanker brands of the Bell and Rogers in particular.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll now go to MP Johari. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank to the witnesses for your testimony. It was quite informative. I'd like to start with Mr. Lawford. Mr. Lawford, you indicated or you categorized the funding that the government has provided as fragmented. Can you explain why do you feel it's fragmented? And explain what drivers do you use to call it fragmented?
Sure. The reason why it's fragmented is because it comes out not all at one time. So we've had a number of programs: Connect to Innovate, Connecting Canadians, the Universal Broadband Fund, you know, the bank, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank funding bump up at different times. But the other main part of the process that makes it uncoordinated is it is application driven. I shouldn't use the word beauty contest, but that's what it is. You put in an application. If your application is good, you get the money. There are other ways to do this. There are ways, reverse auctions. There are fewer categories of criteria that you need to satisfy, and you could probably have a more efficient system, Mr. Hari. So it's for that reason. It's also that the funding comes from at least 2 locations, from the federal government's ISED division and also from the CRTC's ongoing broadband fund. And then finally, there are provincial funds, often matching, not matching, different deadlines. So the coordination challenges with that, especially for a smaller community-based provider, I think are very difficult.
Thank you. Who do you believe would be able to bring alignment for these fundings, in your point of view?
It's tempting to want to leave it with the CRTC because they are the natural regulator in this area. I don't believe they have the statutory authority at the moment. Perhaps the committee could consider that. But the difficulty is that most of the funding comes through the federal government and where it should rightly be from, because when you're building things, you want that to be taxpayer money and be accountable to the voters. It's hard without a national broadband plan to know where to cut that off. That's why we suggested a neutral third party, if you will, to at least temporarily be a broadband czar and get the whole house in order. And then perhaps we should think about legislation to formally give it to CRTC.
Yeah, well, you talked about the legislation. What would be one of the key characteristics of that legislation?
Well, if you were to take a look at the U.S. legislation, you'll see that it requires funding be up to a certain standard so that all Canadians would have the same rough access to advanced telecommunications. That's the way the U.S. law is structured. It has a joint federal-state board to work out problems between the two levels of government in the United States. I think that would be smart in Canada as well. It has special pillars for, as I say, education, healthcare, and Indigenous access, so that those issues are dealt with properly and not sidelined. Those are
Yep.
pillars of that system.
Thank you. If I may go to Mr. Kaplan. Mr. Kaplan, I want to follow up on Mr. Sloan question, and I'll put it to you in a little bit of a different way. How do you drive your calculation for what the wholesale price should be? What drivers do you use?
Are you asking what the wholesale rate ought to be, or
Yes.
what our retail pricing?
Wholesale rate, because my understanding is CRTC is setting up the wholesale rate or recommending it, and you didn't feel comfortable talking about what are the drivers, but you said you have your own calculation. So I'm asking you, what do you use as key drivers to calculate your wholesale rate?
Okay, so there's a couple of different things going on here. The wholesale rate that's set at the CRTC, just to be clear, that is the price that companies like TechSavvy buy incumbent services at. And that's a rate that incumbents propose and the CRTC approves. And after some adjustments often. There's a long established process to figure out what those wholesale rates ought to be. It's called phase 2 costing. It goes back to the 70s for other telecom services. And it is strong, and we think that it should stay in place.
I'm going to run out of time very quickly. Do you think it should be updated?
I think that there are some updates that could be made to make it more effective that TechSavvy has argued in an ongoing proceeding.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now start our third round, and our first round of questions goes to MP Cumming. You have the floor for 5 minutes. MP Cumming?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your work, Madam Chair, with trying to get the ministers here as soon as possible and accepting that we'll see them into the new year. I do want to take a brief moment before I talk to the witnesses to also be able to put forward a motion on the table in relation to the study of the domestic manufacturing capacity for COVID-19 vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine task force members be invited to appear for 1.5 hours separately from other witnesses at their earliest opportunity in January. And if there's no agreement on this point, you can consider this as a verbal notice of motion, so we consider it at the next meeting. And with that, I'll carry on to the witnesses, and I'd like to start with Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, congratulations on the work that you've done for the Pekanachum First Nations. It's really remarkable in that this really isn't your core area of work, providing wireless and broadband installations. But I do want to come back to a point that you made, your struggle with dealing with the major companies and trying to get something going for that group. Can you elaborate a bit on what were the barriers? What is it that you saw could have been different and would have potentially gotten service into those communities quicker rather than coming up with the alternative with satellite, albeit it looks like it might be a very reasonable solution?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, I began down this path September 2019, year ago, so 14 or so months. The usual traditional means of reaching out, engaging with basically the community, tasked me with doing whatever I could to change their situation. I would consider it to be desperate. The playing field was not level, is not level for these communities, and they were in lockdown and isolation. So when I started down this path, it was prior to COVID. COVID only accelerated that. After 8 months of engaging with, the local telecommunications company, they came back to me and offered me 10% of the 1 gigabit that was in the cable plan. At that point, having done this a number of times, my frustration, my inability to go back to the community and feel like I had done my part to solve this issue had reached new heights. Um, my feedback typically over the years has been met with indifference. We've often been told there's no money in servicing these communities. And, I think it was Albert Einstein who said no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And to me, I have no sympathy for telecommunication companies in Canada based on what I've faced and had to deal with and what I see these communities fighting for. They have had the opportunity to be competitive. They have had a head start on everyone else. They have had funding and support from taxpayers, provincial governments, federal governments, and they have failed to deliver solutions and alternatives to Indigenous communities. They're not asking for 4K Netflix. They're asking for an ability to do court from a community. Kanchicum hasn't had court in 9 months because of the lockdown. We did a proof of concept within the same day we went into that community. We did a 3-way video conference between the Kenora Courthouse, the Kanchicum Bail Beds program, and a representative from the Indigenous Justice Group in Toronto. And the person with the poorest connection was the individual in Toronto. So we basically got tired of banging our head up against the wall to solve a problem, approaching it in the same way that it's always been approached, using terrestrial telecommunications companies to do it with. And we went to SpaceX, and it was like a barn raising. I was working with friends and colleagues, and they took this project on with as much passion and desire as I had, as much need as the community had. That's not what it's like to work with a telecommunications company. I've taken years off my life. I'm only 26 years old, so I can't do this every time for every community. But I did want to do it one time to show every Indigenous community what was possible, and that there is another way to do business and another option out there, and it is no longer business by default, and it is not a monopoly. You can look at other options and other avenues. So,
Thank you for your efforts.
thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And we'll now go to MP Lambropoulos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being with us today to answer our questions. One of the things that stood out to me in testimony, and it's obviously something that's pretty obvious on its own, but when it was mentioned, it stuck out even more. The fact that many Canadians who miss meals often do it because they're paying for their phone bills. And obviously that's not fair. I feel that during COVID-19, the gap, between people and the equality gap has gotten even bigger because many people need good connection in order to participate in our economy. And if we look even at the education system, many Canadians are going to eventually be turning to online education in the coming months because we don't know where exactly we're headed. And that's a very big concern to me. We often say that all Canadians have access to education. Well, if we turn and make it more online, then that won't be the case anymore. And not everyone will have equal access to getting past the barriers that currently exist for them. So given that context, many of you gave us some examples of how our government can get involved in making sure that internet connection is more affordable, that cell phone bills are more affordable. Minister Baines has committed to getting cell phone bills decreased by 25% in the next few years. Are there any suggestions that you have that are not already being looked at that could lower the cost for Canadians who are lower income Canadians. I also heard someone say that many Canadians wouldn't mind having an extra 50 cents added to their bill in order to help make up for those that can't. Are there any suggestions that haven't been mentioned yet to help make it more affordable that our government can implement? I guess that question goes to anyone who wants to answer it.
For the subsidies we're discussing, those have all been suggested but not implemented. There have been government programs trying to get $10 internet to Canadians of modest means that are voluntary from the companies, and that is a good idea. But the difficulty is that it's voluntary, so some companies are not participating. It's limited only to Canadians who have children who are receiving benefits for the Canada Child Benefit. And if that could be widened to include all low-income people, whether they have children or not, and if it could be made not optional for the telecommunications companies for this internet plan that Minister Baines has been running, Connecting Families, that would help an awful lot. I don't think that was specifically mentioned, but that's an easy, I think, one to do. Although I'm sure the companies would have something to say about that. But it would take some money, but it would be a great improvement to that program.
Thank you very much. If anyone else wants to chime in, you can let me know. But I'll move on to my next question. Mr. Kaplan, you've unmuted yourself. Would you like to add?
Yeah, just to add that there are, a number of piecemeal initiatives to lower prices, which are good for the outcomes that they have. I'm thinking about the minister's commitment to lower mobile prices by 25%, and connecting families is another good example. These are ends that could also be achieved through robust, stable competition. That is the goal of that. So the goal of lowering mobile prices is a good example. You're asking the same companies who have inflated prices on the one hand to voluntarily lower prices. Of course, they may do that. They are doing it in different ways. And they may reach those goals, but that's not the kind of systemic change that's going to sustain that pricing. That can only come from competition.
I would agree with you.
I would, if I can, just briefly.
Yeah.
I'd actually agree with Mr. Kaplan there that competition, I would argue, facilities-based competition. And if you look over the last 5 years with declining prices, a lot of that can be attributed to the regional players coming in. It's been federal government policy now for the last 15, 20 years, and all governments have supported it, where they've been trying to grow 4 players in each region. And because of that, we are starting to see prices come down. Have they come down as much as everyone would like? Probably not. There's still more room to go, but I believe that facilities-based competition is the way to go.
Merci beaucoup. Notre prochaine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemire. 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Israel. You said that funds are too compartmentalized and fragmented, and it doesn't help Canadians that we need funds to come under one single universal program. What are the advantages of having a single program for all Canadians?
Thank you for the question. So a single directed program could be much more efficient in identifying where to direct funds rather than relying on funding applications and across the number of funding envelopes. So to give an example of something that the current government has done that is a directed funding initiative that's extremely helpful, the government is committed to connect Iqaluit, which is a capital of Nunavut, to the transatlantic cable, which will give that city direct fiber access. That's a very targeted investment that the government identified as an area where money can go to connect the city in a direct way that will improve connectivity issues in a remote area. And then they opened up an RFP for who wants to carry out that project that's been identified as a priority. In contrast, the way that it works now, There's multiple, as you're aware, funding programs that different subscribers apply to with various projects. And based on the projects that are proposed and existing priorities, the best ones are selected. But there's no overall mission or plan to identify where the key areas to provide to fill in the gaps are most needed. So it's very much left to what proposals come up. And also identifying different efficiencies around use of spectrum, use of spectrum. So for example, perhaps a more efficient way to maximize the utility of spectrum is to force spectrum holders who are not building in rural areas to make that spectrum available to other municipalities, local indigenous groups to build their own infrastructure over that spectrum to address local needs while the spectrum is sitting unused on a cost recovery basis. So those types of solutions could emerge if a more strategic and holistic approach is taken to addressing where the actual challenges are, as opposed to just the current divergent approach that's being undertaken.
Merci beaucoup.
Goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is probably my 100th meeting on this subject matter. Having been on the and I gotta be honest, like we have so many advantages, even with our problems. And I hear the call for consumers to pay more to help others, but I mean, again, we're raking in billions of dollars on the spectrum auction, and then we're throwing out a whole bunch of different programs out there that we again, it's almost like a dog's breakfast. I've used that term before, where we're trying to figure out how to plug all these things together. So I actually, quite frankly, I don't really have a question at this point, Madam Chair. I'll turn my time over. I literally like the idea of a czar at this particular point in time to help coordinate these things because it can be done on the not only for the build out from the spectrum and then also from the hard stuff that needs to be done on the ground to that of the consumer aspect to re-coordinate and pivot ourselves, because the frustrating but also the benefit is that this is all publicly regulated. So we actually have some benefits, and we have some great incumbents, and we have some great and new entrants in the market, but it's got to be done in a more fair way. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank the guests, though, because it has been very worthwhile today.
Thank you very much, MP Massey. Our next round of questions goes to MP Sloan. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a couple of questions for Mr. Giz. And I understand, I believe some of your comments that the internet is not part of your portfolio, but I just want to see if you had any comments in relation to some of the discussion earlier about the inflation of wholesale rates and potentially even some of these large carriers undercutting their own arguments in terms of what wholesale rates should be. If you don't want to answer, that's fine, but I think you're the only witness here representing some of these larger carriers. So if you wanted to talk about that, I'd be glad to hear it.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and to give me the opportunity. I'll relate it to my files, and that is, I think you can see a direct correlation between mandated MVNOs and the TPIA decision. It's really about prices that come in that get regulated that are below that can be below market value, and if someone has to sell for below market value, it's going to take away their incentive to go invest, because if they can't recoup that money, what's the point of going to do it? Second of all, and I'll go back to the MVNO argument on the wireless side, is that if you can be an MVNO and you can piggyback off of other networks, then that's even less of an incentive to go out and invest. And I've gone through some of the facts already, but if you look at our coverage, and I realize there's still more to do, but relatively speaking, it's quite good. If you look at the quality of our networks, we have the fastest download speeds in the world. This all comes because of competition. So I truly believe that if you want to have quality networks, see more build-outs happen so that more Canadians are connected, allowing facilities-based competition is the best way to go.
But I just want to ask you another question here. You noted that in terms of cost of cell phone service and cost of a gig of data, it's costs have been going down, but we're still lagging behind other countries, and costs around the world have been going down. Um, how can we fix this? I mean, you were talking about the need for, an incentive to invest and so forth. But I mean, is it really practical to expect, multiple different networks in every area of this country? I mean, we're a big country. I don't know if that's practical in every single area of the country.
Yeah, great question. I think when it comes to prices coming down, we've really just seen it over the last probably 5 to 8 years where the new entrants our regional players have had the opportunity to start to make a difference. If you look at the percent of the new customers that they're picking up quarterly, it's way above where their baseline is. So we're seeing that competition come into helping to drive down prices. But I'd like to point out that when I have meetings with my competitor or with my counterparts, whether or not it's in the US or Australia, I ask them what are the big issues they're dealing with. For example, when they go before a parliamentary committee or a legislative committee, and they say the problem that they have to deal with is around pricing and coverage. The same thing we have here. We always think that the grass is greener on the other side. Quite frankly, it's not. We are doing well in Canada. We can do better, and there is more to do.
And thank you for that. Madam Chair, I'd like to share the rest of my time with MP Cumming, please.
Go ahead, MP Cumming.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lawford, you did, in your testimony, you had talked about the broadband czar. One of the things that I've noticed is that we have a very diverse group of programs, and you alluded to that were 4 or 5 different funds, different programs. And I understand the idea of a czar, but would you not think that if this was all under one department, under one entity, and one minister accountable for a result, wouldn't that be a more efficient way, one application process for us to be able to get the goal that I think all of us around the table want, is to get better internet service into these communities at a cost-effective rate?
Yes, I take your point that trying to change the structure, trying to build the train while you're on the track, if you will, which is where we are, is difficult. And where do you locate that? It could be the ISED minister that has an extra coordination function. I just believe that this committee could recommend a legislative change to the Telecom Act to make a legal basis for setting up a plan to get somebody in place to coordinate all this, because at the moment it's too diffuse, the power, and you end up with a diffuse, frankly, I hate to say it, Canadian kind of solution where everybody's pulling and pushing all the time, and it's not very efficient, and we need to get going on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawford. And our next round of questions will go to MP Asasi. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was wondering if I could turn to Mr. Kaplan. Mr. Kaplan, thank you for your testimony. You spoke at length about how the incumbents have been acting in an uncompetitive fashion. And I was wondering if, for the benefit of all of the members of this committee, if you could expand on that so we have a better sense of the landscape, and what some of your suggestions would be to ensure that competition is a big part of this.
I expanded on some of it. I'll go over some of that again, and let me know if there's any aspect of it that's especially unclear. The issue is, for our Competition Bureau complaint, the issue specifically is that Bell and Rogers have for years inflated wholesale rates before the CRTC, keeping competitors' costs high and ensuring that competitors' retail pricing also has to be high. And then at the same time, especially over the past few years, they've introduced these flanker brands, which are specifically targeted at competing with competitors. So they are really, Bell and Rogers brands. They're Virgin and Fido is what I'm talking about. and they sort of act like their competitors. People in the market even perceive them as being alternatives to the big providers. And they are explicitly designed to compete with wholesalers, and they undercut us on our pricing. And the way they do that, I mean, they really know what all of our costs are, right? We're buying services from Bell and Rogers at wholesale rates, some of them regulated, some of them unregulated. They know exactly what our costs are, and they undercut us right at that point. If the CRTC's final rates from August 2019 were implemented, that would do away with that strategy. We would then have the space to move where we could price lower, and we think that all retail pricing would then come down. Effectively, we would be disciplining their pricing, where right now they're disciplining our pricing.
So you would say, having listened to your testimony, that the manner in which they approach this is intentional, just to slow the process down and to make it anti-competitive?
The way in which, so look, it is to their benefit to delay, because as long as they delay, they maintain the status quo. So I do think that that's part of the strategy. Their flanker brands undercutting us is explicitly part of their strategy. They say so in financial statements. They like to see negative wholesale, right? They like to see their wholesale business decline because they see that as gains for their retail side. And the strategy for Bell to launch Virgin was specifically to attack competitors. That seems quite clear.
Thank you for that. Now, if we could turn to Mr. Brown, please. Mr. Brown, you also spoke about this very same dynamic. You were explaining to us as you're trying to assist Indigenous communities, specifically in Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec, that you've come up against this very same dynamic. Would you care to elaborate on that and perhaps explain to us why you find that it's so time consuming for you to provide services to the various communities you've been working with?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. That there's no money in it for these telecommunication companies, and that's their approach. Despite being funded in many, many cases by taxpayers to provide infrastructure, they simply don't have the desire to do so. It's about maximizing profits, not maximizing service delivery and coverage. In a conversation yesterday with a member from a telecommunications company where I was once again trying to level the playing field, the feedback was there's Vancouver and there's Toronto, there's a couple speed bumps in Calgary in between. The rest really doesn't much matter. And that approach is exactly why we are here and why these communities are where they are. And so it took a different approach to solve this problem. And satellite-based solutions are that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, that ends our third round and our time for today. I'd like to thank the witnesses again for being here, the IT team, Service de Traduction, for your impeccable work as always. And just to let the committee know, Thursday we are scheduled to review the draft report of the Investment Canada Act. And so if you haven't had a chance to read that, please make sure that you do. If there's any changes to that schedule, we will definitely be in touch through the clerk. And with that, I will confirm again that Bell will be with us on Tuesday, January 26th. And again, any other changes to the schedule, we will send those around your way. Once again, thank you very much. And I call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Miigwech.